Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, everybody. Glad you could join us for the screen. Is a little bit about my background and the things that I've done. My career has primarily focused in the energy sector, but to talk about some of the issues affecting industrial control systems, I think frankly, a number of the issues are really present across all industrial control systems, not specifically or exclusively energy. There's a lot of lessons to be learned in water manufacturing, transportation, and other sectors. So let's jump in. A little bit about Ultra Electronics and 3ETI. Specifically, 3ETI is a subsidiary of the larger organization called Ultra Electronics, a $1.1 billion group, approximately 500 employees located around the world, over 60 countries, a number of very significant specialty capabilities containing connection and protection. The products and services produced by Ultra Electronics are used by military and industrial facilities around the world. And I'm pleased to note that inside of the 3ETI division of electronics, we actually have a number of expertise in the space, and actually two folks who function as advisors to NATO. And we're also very, very involved with ISA and the Society of American Engineers. All right. Straight from the United States Department of Homeland Security, we see the following news. It's a little distressing. Here's the bad news. The bad news is that in 2015, there were 295 incidents reported to TCS CERT. So we'll call that the bad news. The good news, however, it is DHS's characterization that 98% of the incidents that were reported could have been either prevented or very significantly mitigated if the owners and operators had employed the measures that were put forth in the strategies document. Now, we're going to talk about, today, we're going to talk about the attack surface. DHS indicates that reducing the attack surface alone can reduce the percentage of incidents by 17%. Pretty significant. Today, we're going to be talking about measures 2, 3, and 4 as identified by the Department of Homeland Security. If you look, detailed look at the DHS pinwheel that they provide, it's interesting to observe that 29% of incidents can be prevented or mitigated through the use of effective proper configuration management, 7% by reducing the attack surface, and 9% by using a defendable environment. So overall, the things that we're going to be talking about in today's session, 5% of the reported attacks could have been either prevented or significantly mitigated in the strategies that we're going to cover. If you do these three things right, you will have a much easier time defending your system from attack. It's a little like a castle in that if you build it strong, you defend yourself against a much larger attacking force. However, or being unable to implement these measures could mean that you and your organization will be fighting a number of smaller fires that might mask a more significant and more sophisticated and coordinated attack. these strategies are pretty important to add to one's arsenal of defense. So here's what we're going to go over today. Over the next bit less than 30 minutes, we're going to talk about what DHS had. We're going to talk about some of the benefits and limitations of attack surface reduction. We're going to talk about this within the context of industrial control system environments. There'll be key takeaways, and we hope, based on time, be an opportunity for you to provide questions, and we will provide answers to those questions. So, attacks are getting more intense. Some of you may have observed that the Verizon data breach was published in March of this year, publicly disclosing this water organization, which they have labeled the Community Company, although I think that that is not the name of the organization. If you have a chance to read through the Verizon data breach report, you can observe how the operators of this water system unfortunately had a large attack surface and frankly did not have very good controls. We observed that with a defendable environment, there would have been more opportunities to identify attackers praying and setting up a coordinated attack in Ukraine. It limited what the attackers would have been able to do and which systems they would enable to simultaneously attack. To the specific DHS recommendations, I thought it would be appropriate to identify some measures that are consistent with the DHS recommendations but not specifically called out. But because these are important, I thought it would be useful to talk about them. Fundamentally, we recommend that you take steps to ensure that you do not make yourself a target. Although it is true, you cannot rely on security through obscurity. It's in your interest not to make it easy for the attackers. The more information that's out there, or the more accessible your systems are, the larger the pool of attackers are who might attempt to go to your systems. That is appropriate to consider using tools like Shodan or other scanning mechanisms to independently verify levels of exposure within your own address space. It's important to recognize that over things can change, and sometimes there are unauthorized changes that happen within an industrial control system that do not go through proper change management, configuration management activities. So we strongly recommend that you do your own scanning and analysis to ensure that somebody has not either purposefully or accidentally opened up part of your SCADA-controlled networks to the Internet. Topic to touch on is a recommendation that you avoid control system selfies. According to Christian Science Monitor, the creators of the Stuxnet malware, which have been designed to infiltrate Iran's uranium enrichment facilities, are said to have relied on an image of a control system monitor to figure out the configuration of the facility's images. We see a picture, just one of a series of 48, depicting former Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's tour of the desert site. Now, in this case, the country themselves released these photos, and in doing so, have disclosed sensitive information about their operations. It's important that organizations take steps to do things like not only identify critical components that are part of your control systems networks, but moreover, take steps to protect network topologies, configuration information, framed gold to adversaries, and action be taken to protect them. The RAND Stuxnet situation has demonstrated sensitive information disclosure can have a very significant and real-world impact. So let's talk a little bit about the surface. Reading the attack surface should not simply mean creating a boundary from the external world into the internal one. Although it's true that there should absolutely be boundary protection, it should not be the only protection. The boundary control is in reality simply a low bandwidth channel. In fact, air gaps, despite what folks might think, actual air gaps of literal separation between industrial control systems in some level of business networks, support networks, or even the internet. True gaps almost never literally exist. In and out, these include patches, log files. What about equipment? Backups, things pass over and traverse air gaps. The question remains, when an attacker is in your network, what can attack? This attack surface that we're talking about, the attack surface inside of the industrial control system network, and frankly, many times it is overlooked. The target breach is a great example of this. In this situation, an attacker compromised the building automation system and then found that they could attack the payment processing system. The attack surface inside of the target's network was huge and resulted in a huge impact. This can be said of the recent events in Ukraine. Our next slide here is a little bit of zombie humor, but we're trying to make a point about managing risk. Frankly, hospitals expect to have sick people. That's why they exist. Some hospitals are prepared for very highly contagious outbreaks. Hospitals have areas of quarantine. They purposely segment areas so that an infection or compromise in one area is allowed to spread into adjacent areas. This ought to be true for control system networks. Reducing your attack surface fundamentally is really about limiting what an attacker can do once they are in your system. We suggest that you approach the problem in this way. If the attacker is actually in your network, without worrying about how they got there, but just imagine that they're there. Now, ask yourself, what can you do and where do they go? This process of reducing your attack surface and limiting the risk impact of a cyber attack on your industrial control system networks. Let's turn to the DHS recommendations. First, in order to be successful at creating a configuration management program, you have to First, understand all of the elements inside of your industrial control system. This includes communication paths and traffic patterns. We recommend that you perform appropriate patching within your industrial control system networks. Each computer, device, software application, and component within your ICS environment is a brick in your security wall. Vulnerability in one of the bricks, then frankly, there is a hole in your wall that weakens the entire structure. Those holes should be patched or replaced as appropriate. Configuration management allows you to quickly and easily know what you have, both software and versions. But as we observed in 2014, when attackers infected vendor firmware with Havoc's malware, just because there is a new version doesn't mean that you install it. You should from your vendors the ability to know for sure that the patch that you've obtained is firmware that they created, done via digital signatures or hashes. If the vendor makes the hash available, ensure that there is a means of distributing that hash in an out-of-band fashion. The hacker can modify the firmware on a web page. They can also certainly modify the hash that is displayed on that same web page. Signatures are certainly a step in the right direction, but multiple advanced persistent threat attacks, including Stuxnet, have demonstrated signed keys can be stolen and can be used for malicious purposes. So, let's get down into this a little bit and talk about how it can happen. How do you do this? To determine what is allowed to come in and come out, who is allowed to change or update equipment, and how often audits are performed. Through both operational policies and technical measures. You can use physical security to prevent anyone from bringing in equipment on site, and can deploy port authentication and USB blocking software to prevent unauthorized connections. A change management program, how systems can change and how components are added, removed, and modified. How things happen, how they happen. You can perform audits to validate and verify that changes are happening according to organizational process and procedures. Again, this is predicated on having an up-to-date inventory of all components within your control system networks. I recommend that you consider establishing Google Alerts or use many of the different website trackers to automatically alert you in that your vendor firmware page updates of situational awareness of changes. You want to keep an eye on other bug cracking and vulnerability disclosure programs. Unfortunately, for a number of owners and operators, they are running industrial control systems that are not currently being maintained or upgraded by vendors. Obviously, there needs to be an appropriate level of testing before any changes can occur. Changes should be thoughtfully and conscientiously made. Patches should not be applied immediately in the absence of testing, and first verifying with the vendor that the patch is correct. Finally, all changes should be authorized and planned, part of the overall configuration and change management program for the organization. Test recommendation number 3, in reducing the surface attack area. Let's take a look at what this means. got a good idea of what you have and how it is configured, the question becomes, can a device or a system act or do more than what it needs to? Just as a device can do more than what it needs to, doesn't mean that it should. What we observe is that attackers will use privileges or services available on one system to attack another system. In order to reduce the attack surface, operators should be very focused on reducing the number of ports and services that an attacker can leverage against them. Also, how to restrict communications between devices. You need to talk to each other, how to put into place logical or physical separations. If you do need to talk to each other, but only over a certain protocol or service, then limit communications to only those necessary protocols or services. If the communication is only one way, then restrict the ability of the listener to talk back. In a control system environments, there are many ways that there are only one-way communication flows, from sensor readings to historians and HMIs receiving status and alerts. Making these interactions to one-way communications will greatly reduce the attack surface, what the attacker can do and where they can go. Also, reducing the application attack surface within the industrial control system networks. In the event that there are PCs or Linux workstations literally a part of the ICS networks, remove all unnecessary programs including Acrobat, games, and media players. So a bit more. How to do this? What are ways that you can build walls and prevent unauthorized communications? Well, as stated earlier, you can do this either physically by separate network communications between systems or using a variety of different tech solutions. These technology solutions include traditional firewall and absolute one-way data diode and cryptographic separation. It's feasible to separate different devices and systems through physical separation. You can use end-to-end encryption to separate them logically. Plans are a useful quality of service and segmentation technique. However, they are not sufficient alone as a security control. But combining VLANs with encryption can allow multiple services and networks to coexist over the same physical network without the ability to interact. You can control what is being said through firewalls or one-way data diodes. However, these only control data flows, not necessarily the discrete communications or commands within those discussions. That solution would be through the protocol parsers, which understand not only the protocol being used, but it can also limit specific messages that are being allowed and in what direction. DHS recommendation number 4, building a defendable environment. Building a defendable environment is not about simply ensuring that barriers are in place and authorized communications and connections are prohibited. That's only part of the strategy. It's all about defending the environment. So it comes down to putting into place the ability to see inside the perimeter to observe what are the communications that are going on in specific choke points. Think of them as additional guards, not only on the outside and at the edges of the perimeter, but inside of the castle's corridors. Watch for communications or messages that do not belong. It's important that entities put into place measures to provide visibility and ability to monitor traffic to make that there are no unauthorized communications that are going on. If that unauthorized communications are observed, the organization can then implement an incident response plan to mitigate and manage that risk. System environments tend to be relatively static. So if configured correctly, the number of alerts and unanticipated or unauthorized communication attempts will be small. Or in the event that an attacker does attempt to communicate either outside of the network or communications within the network, should be readily identifiable. Important to make sure that security alerts, logs, and security events do not disrupt the actual operation of the ICS network. We recommend that you consider using out-of-band management, security signals and messages that allow alerts to be sent to security practitioners that are not going to be transmitted on the actual industrial control network and therefore will not impact that network. Just to mention that not only are issues being talked about by DHS, but other groups and organizations have identified very similar measures and techniques to reduce risk. One widely used cybersecurity standards for critical infrastructure and control systems is IEC 62443, also known as ISA 99. When ISA 99 was first proposed, there were a limited number of solutions that were available to address these issues. The good news is that that has changed, and in today's world, there are additional technical measures available for achieving these goals. Drawing to an end here, let's talk about some of the key takeaways that should be considered when implementing these particular DHS strategies. First, understand what are the component parts that make up your control system wall, both the perimeters and components. They change and restrict and unscheduled changes. Secondly, if you're using it, if it's not essential to the operation, turn it off. Employ the principle of minimum privilege. Third, just build it, monitor it. Make sure that you are able to identify and react to unexpected or unauthorized changes or conditions. And I want to just point out that there are technologies and technical solutions that are available to help. TI manufactures and sells products that can assist in this space in deep inspection, encryption, port authentication.